Commander Velkith had studied war for 300 years. His species, the Sarthon, had conquered 11 star systems and defeated 42 different alien races. They were masters of battle. They knew every trick, every strategy, every way to break an enemy. When the Galactic Council sent him to observe the humans in their war against the Crushed Dominion, he expected to see nothing new. Humans were young. They had only been traveling between stars for 200 years. What could they possibly teach a Sarthon commander? He arrived aboard the human warship, called the Horizon's Edge, on a cold morning by their calendar. Captain Lisa Morgan met him at the docking bay. She was a woman in her early 40s with short auburn hair and gray eyes that looked very tired. She shook his hand firmly, which was a human custom he had studied. "Welcome aboard, Commander Velkith," she said. "We are honored to have a Sarthon observer with us." Velkith noticed the dark circles under her eyes. She had not slept well in many days. He also noticed that her uniform was perfectly clean and pressed despite the ship showing signs of recent battle damage. "I am here only to watch and learn," Velkith told her. "I will not interfere with your operations." Captain Morgan smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "I should warn you, Commander, this will not be a clean war. The Crash do not follow the rules of engagement, and neither do we anymore." Velkith did not understand what she meant. War was war. There were winners and losers. The strong survived and the weak did not. It was simple. She assigned him quarters near the bridge and gave him full access to observe their operations. He spent the first 2 days walking through the ship, studying the crew. There were 432 humans aboard. They came from different places on their home planet with different skin colors and different accents. Some were young, barely adults by human standards. Others were older with gray in their hair and lines on their faces. What struck Velkith most was how they talked to each other. They laughed together. They argued. They shared meals and told stories about their families back home. A young officer named Kevin Parks showed him pictures of his sister's wedding. An engineer named Rosa Martinez talked about her 6-year-old daughter who was learning to read. This was strange. Toth Sarthon soldiers did not form such bonds. They were bred for war, trained from birth, and they served until they died. Personal connections were seen as weakness. They clouded judgment and made soldiers hesitate when they should act. On the 3rd day, the alarm sounded. Velkith made his way to the bridge and found it filled with controlled chaos. Officers shouted information back and forth while Captain Morgan stood at the center, calm and steady. "Report," she commanded. 12 crash warships, Captain. Lieutenant Park answered. His voice was tight with fear, but his hands moved across his console without stopping. "They dropped out of hyperspace 2 minutes ago. They are moving to intercept." Velkith quickly calculated the odds. The Horizon's Edge had only 2 escort frigates with it. 12 against 3. By any reasonable measure, the humans should retreat or surrender. The Crash had overwhelming firepower. "Orders, Captain," the helmsman asked. Captain Morgan studied the tactical display for a long moment. Then she straightened her shoulders. "All hands to battle stations. Signal the Carolina and the Santa Fe to form up on our flanks. We are going in." Velkith could not believe what he was hearing. "Captain, the odds are very much against you. Tactical retreat would be the logical Choice, Morgan glanced at him. There are 3 colony transports behind us, Commander. 2,000 civilians. If we retreat, the crash will catch them. Then they will die, but your ships and crews will survive to fight another day. Captain's eyes went cold. That is not how we do things, Commander. The battle began 20 minutes later. Velketh watched from an observation station on the bridge as the human ships charged toward the crash formation. It was madness. It was suicide. It was magnificent. The humans fought like nothing had ever seen. They did not follow standard attack patterns. They improvised, adapted, changed their tactics on the fly. When the frigate Carolina lost its forward shields, its captain did not pull back. He angled his ship to protect the horizon's edge and kept firing. Lieutenant Park called out targets with a voice that shook, but he never stopped. His fear was obvious to everyone on the bridge, yet he did his job. He did not run. He did not freeze. Rosa Martinez, the engineer who had shown Velketh pictures of her daughter, worked in the engine room as plasma fires broke out around her. Velketh heard her voice over the intercom, calm and professional, reporting damage and repairs even as her crewmates screamed. In the background, the battle lasted 4 hours, 4 hours of fire and death and desperate fighting. The frigate Santa Fe was destroyed, broken apart by crush missiles, but the humans did not give up. They kept fighting until 8 of the 12 Crest ships were destroyed and the remaining 4 retreated. When it was over, Velketh requested the casualty reports. 37 humans dead, 82 wounded. The horizon's edge had taken heavy damage and would need weeks of repair. That evening, Captain Morgan held a memorial service in the cargo bay. The entire crew gathered, even those who should have been resting after their injuries. Velketh attended as well, standing in the back watching. Captain Morgan read the names of the dead, all 37 of them. She spoke each name slowly and clearly. When she reached certain names, her voice broke. She would pause, take a breath, and continue. Velketh saw tears on the faces of the crew. Hardened soldiers, men and women who had fought bravely just hours before, wept openly for their fallen friends. After the service, Velketh approached the captain. Why do you do this to yourself? He asked, reading the names. Remembering each one, it must cause you great pain. Captain Morgan looked at him with those tired gray eyes. Because they matter, Commander. Every single one of them. They were not just soldiers, they were people. They had families and dreams and lives they will never get to live. The least I can do is remember their names. The Sarthan do not mourn our dead, we celebrate their sacrifice and move on. Then the Sarthan forget, Morgan said quietly, and when you forget, you stop caring. When you stop caring, you stop being human. She paused, or whatever the equivalent is for your species. Velketh returned to his quarters that night with much to think about. He had expected to see primitive warfare, amateur tactics, a young species stumbling through their first real conflict. Instead, he had seen something else entirely, something he could not yet name, but it stayed with him long into the night, keeping him awake. The image of Captain Morgan reading those names would not leave his mind. The horizon's edge limped through space. Toward Outpost Sierra 7, the ship needed serious repairs after the battle with the crash, hull breaches damaged, engines broken, weapon systems. It would take weeks to fix everything. Velk used. This time to study the humans more closely. He walked through the ship, talked to the crew, and tried to understand what made them so different from every other species he had encountered. He found Rosa Martinez in the engine room working on a burned-out power coupling. She had been awake for 18 hours straight, her hands covered in grease and her eyes red from exhaustion. Yet she smiled when she saw him. "Commander Velkith, come to see how the other half lives. I came to observe," he said. "You have been working for a very long time. Should you not rest?" Rosa laughed and wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "Rest can wait. This ship needs to fly. If we cannot fly, we cannot fight. If we cannot fight, we cannot protect the colonies. But you push yourself to the point of collapse. This is not efficient." Rosa set down her tools and looked at him. Her smile faded into something more serious. "Let me tell you something, Commander. I have a daughter back on Earth. Her name is Sophia. She is 6 years old. She has my eyes and her father's smile. Every night before bed, she sends me a message. She tells me about her day, about what she learned in school, about the picture she drew." She pulled out a small device and showed him an image, a child's drawing of a spaceship done in bright colors. Below it, in messy handwriting, were the words, "Come home soon, Mommy. I promised her I would come home," Rosa continued, "and I keep my promises. So I work, I fix this ship, I make sure the engines run, because every hour I spend here is 1 hour closer to seeing my little girl again." Velkith studied the drawing. It was crude and simple, the work of a child who did not understand the vastness of space or the danger her mother faced every day. But Rosa looked at it like it was the most precious thing in the universe. "You fight for one child," Velkith said slowly. "Not for your government, not for abstract ideals, for one small person. I fight for her," Rosa agreed. "And for every other kid out there who deserves to grow up safe. That is what makes it worth it." Velkith left the engine room and made his way to the medical bay. There he found Corporal Danny Lau, a young soldier who had been badly burned during the battle. Plasma fire had covered 60% of his body. The doctor said he would survive, but the recovery would be long and painful. Danny was awake when Velkith entered. His body was wrapped in medical bandages, and machines beeped softly around him. He should have been screaming in agony. The pain must have been terrible. Instead, he was talking to a nurse, dictating a letter. "Tell her I am sorry. I missed her birthday," Danny said, his voice weak but steady. "Tell her the garden is probably beautiful right now. The roses should be blooming. Ask her to send me pictures." "Who are you writing to?" Velkith asked. Danny turned his head slowly. Moving clearly hurt him, but he managed a small smile. "My mother, she loves her garden, works in it every day. I used to help her when I was young. Before I joined the military." "You are in great pain. How can you think of such things?" Danny was quiet for a moment. "Because if I stop thinking about home, I will forget why I am fighting. The pain is temporary, it will pass, but my mother's garden, her smile when she sees the roses bloom, that is real. That is what matters." Velkith had no response. Among his people, wounded soldiers did not think of home. They thought of victory or death. Personal attachments were trained out of them from childhood. They were considered distractions, weaknesses that could compromise a warrior's effectiveness. But Danilu was Not weak, he had fought bravely, he had been burned, saving his crew mates from a fire in the weapons bay, and now lying in a hospital bed with his body broken. He thought of his mother's flowers. Later that day, news arrived from command. The crash had attacked a colony world called Meridian 4. 8,000 civilians were dead, men, women, children, all killed in the bombardment. Velketh was on the bridge when Captain Morgan made the announcement. He watched the crew's faces as they heard the news. No one cried out. No one cursed or shouted for revenge. They simply went still, but something changed in their eyes. Velketh had seen many emotions in battle: fear, anger, desperation. This was different. This was something cold and quiet and very, very dangerous. Captain Morgan called a meeting of her senior officers. Velketh was permitted to observe. We are being reassigned to the Meridian sector, the captain announced. Command wants us to coordinate the evacuation of the remaining colonies. Lieutenant Commander Bates Santos, the executive officer, leaned forward. She was a tall woman with dark hair and sharp features. Evacuation. Captain, those people need protection, not evacuation. If we run, the crash will think they can do this again. We do not have enough ships to mount a proper defense. Then we hold the line with what we have. The argument went back and forth for an hour. Velketh expected Captain Morgan to end the debate, to give orders and demand obedience. That was how the Sarthan military worked. The commander decided and everyone else followed, but Morgan did not do that. She listened. She asked questions. She let her officers disagree with her openly. In the end, they reached a decision. Together, they would evacuate who they could and defend what they could not abandon. It was a compromise. But everyone had been heard. This might be a one-way mission, Morgan said when the meeting was over. I will not lie to you. The odds are not good. Anyone who wants to transfer out, I will approve it. No questions asked, no shame. Velketh waited for the requests to come in. Surely some would choose to leave. Self-preservation was natural. It was logical. Not a single person requested a transfer. That night, Velketh found Kevin Park in the observation lounge, staring out at the stars. The young lieutenant looked tired and scared. May I join you? Velketh asked. Kevin nodded. Sure. Cannot sleep either. I do not require as much sleep as humans, but I find myself unable to rest. Kevin laughed softly. Yeah, funny how knowing you might die soon makes it hard to close your eyes. You are afraid, terrified, Kevin admitted without shame. But I am not leaving. Those people on Meridian, they are counting on us, and if I run away now, I will never be able to look at myself again. Velketh considered this. Among my people, admitting fear is considered disgraceful. Among mine, it is considered honest. Kevin turned to look at him. Fear is not weakness, Commander. It is proof that you understand what you are facing. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to act anyway. Velketh stayed in the observation lounge. Long after Kevin left, he watched the stars drift past and thought about what he had learned. These humans were not like any soldiers he had ever known. They were afraid, but they did not run. They loved their families, and that love made them stronger, not weaker. They disagreed with their commanders, and that disagreement made better decisions. Everything he had been taught about warfare was being challenged by these strange, emotional, impossible creatures, and he was beginning to wonder if everything he had been taught was wrong. The crash came to the Meridian sector with everything they had. 40 warships dropped out of hyperspace in a single wave. Their weapons already charging. Against them stood 11 human vessels, a ragged collection of cruisers and frigates that had been pulled from 3 different fleets. It was not nearly enough. Velketh stood on the bridge of the horizon's edge and watched the tactical display fill with enemy contacts. His mind automatically calculated the odds, 3% chance of survival, maybe less. Commander Velketh, Captain Morgan said, I have arranged for a shuttle to take you to a neutral observation post. You can watch the battle from there. Safety, it was a reasonable offer. Velketh was an observer, not a combatant. He had no obligation to die with these humans. His report to the Sarthan hegemony was already half-written. He could leave now and complete it later. He walked toward the shuttle bay, but something made him stop. At the observation deck, through the windows, he could see the human fleet forming up, their ships moving into position for the coming battle. Behind them, barely visible in the distance, were the evacuation transports. 40,000 civilians fleeing for their lives. The humans could retreat. They could save themselves and let the crash have the sector. The transports would be destroyed, but the military ships would survive. It was the logical choice. Any Saran commander would have made that call without hesitation, but these humans were not retreating. They were preparing to fight, preparing to die. For strangers turned around and walked back to the bridge. Captain Morgan looked surprised to see him. I thought you were leaving. I'm an observer, Velketh said. I should observe. Morgan studied him for a moment, then nodded. Find a station and stay out of the way. The battle began at 6:00 in the morning by human time. Velketh had witnessed hundreds of battles across 3 centuries of warfare. He had seen planets burn and civilizations fall, none of it prepared him for what he saw that day. The human ships charged straight into the crush formation. There was no retreat, no hesitation. They knew they were going to lose, and they attacked anyway. The destroyer Carolina was the first to fall. Her captain was a young man named Henry Cole, barely 30 years old. When his main weapons were destroyed, Velketh expected him to pull back and try to save his crew. Instead, Cole turned his ship toward the largest crash cruiser and accelerated. All hands abandoned ship, Cole announced over the radio. His voice was calm, almost peaceful. It has been an honor serving with you. The Carolina rammed the crash cruiser at full speed. Both ships exploded in a massive fireball. The collision bought the evacuation transports an extra 3 minutes, time enough for 2 of them to reach the jump point and escape. Velketh stared at the screen in shock. He had seen suicide attacks before, but they were always acts of desperation, performed by soldiers who had no other choice. Henry Cole had chosen this. He had given his life to save people he would never meet. The frigate Santa Fe took heavy damage 20 minutes into the battle. Her engines were failing. Her weapons were offline and fires burned throughout the ship. The captain ordered an evacuation. Everyone left except for one person. Chief Petty Officer Maria Santos, Rosa Martinez's cousin, stayed behind. She went to the engine room and began working on the damaged systems. Over the Radio, Velkith heard her explaining what she was doing. If I can restart the secondary engines, I can keep the ship moving, draw some fire away from the others. Maria, get out of there, Rosa's voice came through, desperate and pleading. Please, think about your family. I am thinking about them, Maria replied. I am thinking about all the families on those transports. Tell my kids I love them. Maria Santos kept the Santa Fe moving for 11 more minutes, 11 minutes of drawing crush fire away from the evacuation corridor. 11 minutes that saved 3 more transports. Then the reactor failed and the ship exploded. The battle continued. Velkith watched humans die not as statistics or numbers but as individuals, people he had met, talked to, shared meals with. Ensign Patricia Webb was 22 years old. She came from a place called Nebraska, a flat region in the middle of the human homeland. She had told Velky just a week ago that she wanted to be a teacher. When the war ended, she was going to go back to school and learn how to help children. Patricia died at her communication station, broadcasting coordinates to incoming rescue ships. Her voice remained calm and professional. Even as the fire spread toward her, her last transmission was a set of numbers that guided 3 escape pods to safety. Lieutenant Gregory Nash was 31. He had twin sons back on Earth, and he carried their pictures everywhere. Just 2 days before the battle, he had shown those pictures to Velkeith and talked about how much he missed them. Gregory died sealing a whole breach with his own body. The emergency doors had failed and the section was losing atmosphere. 3 crewmates were trapped. On the other side, Gregory threw himself into the gap and held on while they escaped. The vacuum killed him in seconds, but his crewmates lived. 9 hours. The battle lasted 9 hours. When it was finally over, 7 human ships had been destroyed. The remaining 4 were barely functional, but the evacuation transports had escaped. 40,000 civilians were safe. Velkith found Captain Morgan in her ready room after the battle. She sat alone at her desk, staring at a screen filled with names. The list seemed endless. 2,318. She said without looking up, that is how many we lost today. Velkith stood in the doorway, unsure what to say. You saved 40,000. I know the math, Commander. Her voice cracked. I know we won. I know it was worth it. But right now, all I can think about is Patricia Webb. She told me last week that she wanted to be a teacher. She was going to go back to school. She had plans, she had dreams, and now she is gone. Tears rolled down Morgan's cheeks. She did not wipe them away. Velkith had never seen a commanding officer weep. Among the Sarthon, such displays of emotion would be considered unforgivable. Weakness, a commander who cried would be removed from duty immediately. But Captain Morgan had just led her fleet through an impossible battle. She had made the hard decisions, given the terrible orders, and now in private she allowed herself to feel the weight of what that cost. The Sarthon do not mourn, Velkith said quietly. Death in battle is our highest honor. We celebrate it, not grieve it. Morgan finally looked at him. Her eyes were red and wet. Then how do you remember what you are fighting for? Velkeith had no answer. He left the ready room and walked through the damaged ship. Everywhere he went, he saw humans helping each other, medics treating the wounded, engineers repairing broken systems, soldiers comforting their grieving friends. No one was alone in The medical bay, Rosa Martinez sat beside a bed, holding the hand of a dying woman. The woman was a stranger, someone Rosa had never met before the battle. But she held her hand anyway, talked to her softly, made sure she did not die. Alone, in the corridor, Kevin Park was helping Carrie, wounded, to the infirmary. His own arm was bandaged, blood seeping through the wrapping, but he kept working, kept helping, refused to stop. In the cargo bay, someone had set up a makeshift memorial. Pictures of the dead were arranged on a table, surrounded by candles and flowers that the crew had somehow found among their personal belongings. Velketh stood before the memorial for a long time. He looked at the faces of the humans who had died that day. They were young and old, male and female, from different places and different backgrounds. They had nothing in common except one thing: they had all chosen to die for strangers. For the first time in 300 years, Velketh felt something he could not explain. It was not tactical appreciation. It was not professional respect. It was something deeper, something that made his chest tight and his throat thick. He finally understood why the humans were winning this war. It was not their weapons or their tactics. It was not their technology or their numbers. It was their hearts. The war continued for another 18 months. Velketh remained aboard the Horizon's edge throughout. He had stopped thinking of himself as a neutral observer. Long ago, the humans had accepted him as one of their own, and he found that he no longer wanted to leave. He ate meals with the crew in the cafeteria. He attended their celebrations and their memorials. He learned their customs and their jokes and their strange ways of finding joy in the darkest moments. Slowly, without realizing it, he had become part of their family. Danny Liu recovered from his burns and returned to duty. His scars were severe, covering most of his arms and chest, but he never complained. He showed Velketh the pictures his mother had sent of her garden. The roses were indeed blooming, bright red against the green leaves. She says they are the best they have ever been, Danny said proudly. All that work she put in is finally paying off. Rosa Martinez received a new drawing from her daughter every week. Sophia was in 2nd grade, now learning to write full sentences. Her latest message said, "I miss you, Mommy. My teacher says you are a hero." "I think so too," Rosa cried when she read it. Then she carefully folded the paper and put it in her pocket. Next to her heart, Captain Morgan became Admiral Morgan after the battle at Meridian. She was given command of the entire 3rd Fleet, a collection of 40 ships, assigned to push the crash back from human space. Velketh served as her unofficial advisor, offering insights from his centuries of military experience, but he found himself learning more than he taught. The humans did not fight the way the Sarthon fought. They did not see their soldiers as expendable resources to be spent in pursuit of victory. Every life mattered. Every person had value. When a young pilot named Chris Barton made a mistake during a mission that cost 2 lives, Velketh expected him to be punished. Among the Sarthon, such failures meant death or exile. There was no room for error, but Admiral Morgan did not punish Chris. Instead, she sat with him for 3 hours, talking him through what had happened. She helped him understand his mistake without crushing him. She told him that failure was not the end, that he could learn and grow and become better. We do Not throw people away, she explained too. Velkeith afterward, every person has value, every person can grow, even those who fail, especially those who fail. Failure is how we learn, compassion is how we heal. The Sarthon had no equivalent concept in his culture. Weakness was eliminated, attachment was a liability. Compassion was a word that had no translation in his language, but the humans kept winning, not every battle. The war was brutal, and the losses were terrible, but slowly, steadily they were pushing the crash back. Their fleets grew stronger as new ships came off the production lines. Their tactics evolved with each engagement. Their soldiers fought with a determination that the Kresh could not match. Velkeith finally understood why during the liberation of Helios Station, the Kresh had captured the station early in the war and turned it into a prison camp. 50,000 human civilians were held there in terrible conditions. When the human fleet arrived to liberate them, they found the station heavily defended by 10,000 Crash troops. The military analysts calculated the cost of a direct assault. 3,000 human soldiers would die, possibly more. The tactical recommendation was simple: destroy the station from orbit. It would kill everyone inside, but it would eliminate the threat without risking military lives. Any other species would have accepted that calculation. 50,000 deaths to prevent 3,000 military casualties was a reasonable trade. The Sarthon had made similar decisions many times throughout their history. Admiral Morgan refused. "We are not bombing our own people," she said flatly when the option was presented. "Admiral, the tactical analysis clearly shows I do not care about the tactical analysis. Those are human beings in there, mothers and fathers and children. We are not writing them off. The cost of a ground assault, I know the cost, and we are paying it." The assault on Helios Station lasted 6 days. It was brutal, bloody, exhausting warfare. Street by street, room by room, the human soldiers fought their way through the station. They lost 4,200 people, more than the bombardment would have cost. But when it was over, 43,000 prisoners walked free. Velkeith went down to the station after the fighting ended. He walked among the liberated prisoners. As they emerged from their cells, they were gaunt and thin, their eyes hollow. From months of suffering, many could barely stand. Human soldiers rushed forward to help them. They offered water and blankets and shoulders to lean on. Medics worked through the night treating injuries and malnutrition. No one complained about being tired. No one asked for a break. A young girl approached one of the Marines, a sergeant named Paula Gray. The girl was no more than 8 years old, with tangled dark hair and a broken arm that had been badly set. She should have been terrified of the armored soldier towering over her. Instead, she reached up and touched Paula's face. "Are you real?" she whispered. Paula knelt down in the dust and dirt of the station floor. Her voice was thick with emotion. When she spoke, "Yes, sweetheart, I am real. We are here. You are safe now." The girl threw her arms around Paula's neck and began to cry. Paula held her gently, carefully, as if she was the most precious thing in the universe. Velkeith watched this scene and felt something shift inside him. For 300 years he had studied warfare. He had conquered worlds and destroyed civilizations. He had believed that strength meant power, that victory meant crushing your enemies. Completely, but this was something different. This was strength of a kind he had never imagined. These humans had sacrificed 4,000 of their own people to save strangers. Not for territory, not for resources, not for strategic advantage. They had done it because those prisoners were human beings who deserved to be saved. Velketh walked through the station for hours, watching the reunions and the tears and the overwhelming relief. He saw families finding each other after months of separation. He saw strangers embracing soldiers they had never met, thanking them with words and tears. He found Admiral Morgan near the medical tents, helping to organize the evacuation of the wounded. Her uniform was dirty, her face was tired, but her eyes were bright. 4,200. Velketh said, "That is what this cost." Morgan nodded. "I know you could have destroyed the station, saved all those soldiers." "Yes. Why did you not?" Morgan looked out at the crowds of freed prisoners, at the children running to their parents, at the old men and women weeping with joy. "Because that is who we are," she said simply. "We do not abandon our people, not ever, not for any reason. The moment we start doing the math, calculating who is worth saving and who is not, we stop being human." Velketh stood beside her in silence. He watched a young boy reunite with his mother. The woman fell to her knees and held him so tightly it looked like she would never let go. "My people would never have done this," Velketh admitted. "I know," Morgan replied. "That is why you are watching us win this war." She walked away to help with the evacuation, leaving Velketh alone with his thoughts. He stayed on the station for 3 more days, observing the recovery efforts. He talked to the survivors, heard their stories of captivity and hope. Many of them spoke of the moment they heard the human ships had arrived, how they had wept with relief. One old woman grabbed his hand and would not let go. "They came for us," she said, tears streaming down her face. "They actually came for us. I did not think anyone would." Velketh did not know what to say, so he simply held her hand and let her cry. That night, alone in his quarters, he began to rewrite his report to the Sarthan hegemony. Everything he had believed about warfare, about strength, about what made a species powerful was wrong. He had witnessed something new, something unprecedented, something that changed everything he thought he knew. He had witnessed humanity's true strength, and it was not what he had expected at all. The war ended 14 months after the liberation of Helios Station. The crushed Dominion, battered and exhausted, finally sued for peace. Their fleets were broken, their armies depleted, their will to fight completely gone. They had started this war expecting an easy victory over a young, inexperienced species. They had been wrong. The peace treaty was signed on a neutral station at the edge of crushed space. Velketh attended the ceremony as part of Admiral Morgan's delegation. He stood in the back of the room and watched as representatives from both sides agreed to terms. The humans could have demanded anything. They could have taken crushed territory, seized their resources, imposed harsh punishments that would they dominion for generations. They had earned that right through blood and sacrifice. No one would have blamed them. Instead, the terms were surprisingly fair. The crash would pay reparations to help rebuild the destroyed human colonies. All prisoners of war would be returned. The border between human and crushed space would be restored to its pre-war position. That was all. Velketh approached Admiral Morgan after the ceremony. I do not understand, he said. You could crush them completely. You could take their worlds, enslave their population, erase their civilization from the galaxy. They would do the same to you if the situation was reversed. Morgan looked at him with those tired gray eyes that had seen so much death and suffering over the past 3 years. Probably, she admitted, but that is not who we are. We fight to protect, not to conquer. They killed hundreds of thousands of your people. They deserve to be punished. They have been punished. They lost the war. Their military is broken. Their economy is ruined. And their pride is shattered. Morgan paused, but maybe, just maybe, if we show them mercy now, the next generation of Crush will remember. Maybe they will choose differently. Maybe they will learn that there are other ways to live. That seems very optimistic. Morgan smiled. It was the first real Smileth had seen from her in months. We are human. Optimism is kind of our thing. The human fleet departed 3 days later. Velketh stood on the observation deck and watched the crash station shrink to a point of light behind them. The war was over. Against all odds, against every prediction, the humans had won. Now came the hardest part, deciding what to do next. Velketh returned to his quarters and finished his report to the Sarthon hegemony. It was unlike any assessment he had ever written. He did not focus on human weapons or tactics. He did not analyze their fleet compositions or strategic doctrines. He did not discuss their technology or their military structure. Instead, he wrote about Patricia Webb, who wanted to be a teacher. He wrote about Danny Lau, who thought of his mother's roses while his body burned. He wrote about Rosa Martinez, who worked 18-hour shifts because she had promised her daughter she would come home. He wrote about Henry Cole, who rammed his destroyer into a crash cruiser to save strangers. He wrote about Maria Santos, who died alone in an engine room so that evacuation transports could escape. He wrote about Sergeant Paula Gray, who knelt in the dust to comfort a frightened child. He wrote about Admiral Lisa Morgan, who read the names of every fallen soldier and wept for each one. I have studied warfare for 3 centuries, he concluded. I have led armies and conquered worlds. I believed I understood the nature of strength, the mathematics of victory and defeat. I was wrong. The humans have taught me that true strength is not measured in ships destroyed or territories conquered. It is not found in superior weapons or clever tactics. True strength is measured in what a species is willing to sacrifice for those it will never meet, in the tears shed for the fallen, in the mercy shown to defeated enemies, in the refusal to abandon anyone, no matter the cost. The humans are not the most advanced species in the galaxy. They are not the most numerous or the most ancient. Their ships are not the fastest. Their weapons are not the most powerful. Their soldiers are not the most skilled, but they possess something I have never encountered in any other civilization. They have an unbreakable commitment to the value of individual life. They believe that every person matters, that every life has worth, that no one should be left behind. They fight, not because they love war, but because they love each other. They endure unimaginable suffering, not for glory or conquest, but for hope. They refuse, absolutely refuse, to abandon anyone. I thought I understood war. I thought I knew what strength meant. I was wrong. I did not understand war until I witnessed humanity's true strength, their capacity to care. Velketh filed his report and waited for a response. He expected criticism. He expected the hegemony to dismiss his conclusions as the ravings of an observer who had been corrupted by his subjects. Instead, 3 weeks later, he received a brief message. His report had been reviewed by the High Command. They found his conclusions interesting but irrelevant to Sarthan military doctrine. He was invited to return home and resume his duties. Velketh read the message twice, then he deleted it. He requested a meeting with Admiral Morgan that evening. She received him in her ready room, the same room where he had seen her weep for the fallen after the battle. At Meridian, I wish to request permanent transfer to human space, Velketh said. Morgan raised an eyebrow. That is unusual. The Sarthan do not typically show interest in living among other species. I am no longer typical of my species. Velketh paused, searching for the right words. For 300 years I believed I knew what strength was. I believed I understood the universe and my place in it. Then I met your people. He looked at Morgan, at the lines on her face and the gray in her hair, at the weight of 3 years of war that she carried in her eyes. You showed me something new, something I had never imagined possible. You showed me that strength can come from compassion, that victory can come from sacrifice, that the value of a civilization is not measured in the worlds it conquers, but in the people it protects. Morgan listened in silence. I do not wish to go back to what I was, Velketh continued. I cannot pretend that I did not see what I saw, feel what I felt, learn what I learned. My people will never understand, they will never change, but maybe I can. Maybe if I stay here I can become something better than I was. Morgan studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled. Welcome to the family, Commander. Velketh remained in human space for the rest of his life. He never returned to the Sarthan hegemony. He never again led fleets into battle or conquered worlds. Instead, he became a teacher at the Human Military Academy, sharing his 3 centuries of experience with young officers who were just beginning their careers. He taught them tactics and strategy, logistics and command, but most of all, he taught them what he had learned from the humans themselves. He taught them that true strength was not found in weapons or warships. He taught them that victory meant more than defeating enemies. He taught them that every life mattered, that every person had value, that no one should ever be left behind. And sometimes late at night, when the academy was quiet and the stars shone through his window, he would think about those years aboard the Horizon's edge. He would remember Captain Morgan reading the names of the dead. He would remember Rosa Martinez showing him her daughter's drawings. He would remember the little girl on Helio Station asking Sergeant Gray if she was real. He would remember what it felt like to witness something he had never imagined possible. He would remember when he finally understood what true strength meant, and he would smile because after 300 years of war and conquest and violence, he had finally found something worth believing in. He had found humanity.